The Japanese destroyer Kaga cruised through the waves, its deck buzzing with activity. Orders flew left and right as the crew prepped for the next phase. The jamming signals were activated, sending an invisible pulse across Jeju Island. And just like that, chaos kicked in. Several red, winged ants screeched as their connection to the Ant Queen was cut off like bad Wi-Fi. Kumamoto Atsushi stumbled like a man who had just lost all his Google Maps directions, while Aizawa Ippei, watching him struggle, barely held back his panic. Bro was one step away from throwing hands, with the air. The Japanese hunters pressed forward, moving through the battlefield of dead ants. Tawada Kane, ever the impatient one, casually suggested just speedrunning the mission and wiping out all the ants before the Korean team even had a chance to kill the queen. Meanwhile, Tanaka Kenzo was having a very hands-on approach, snapping the wings off the ants like he was playing with bubble wrap. Elsewhere, Kei was busy flexing his ice magic, raising walls and blocking paths, all while noticing the glow of fire magic lighting up the tunnels in the distance. Fireworks. Oh, that must be that guy, Choi Jong-in. He entertained the thought of what would happen if they went head-to-head. Ice versus fire. Now that'd be a fight worth watching. Meanwhile, the Korean hunters arrived at Baeknak Dam, once a famous crater lake, now just another casualty of the ants' invasion. The place was unrecognizable, a hollowed-out wasteland of dirt and tunnels. This was no longer a national treasure. This was a bug-infested nightmare. Choi Jong-in wasted no time, setting up a ring of fire around one of the tunnels. Normally, his flame prison was used to trap enemies like they owed him money, but today, it was a shield, keeping any ant's B rank or lower from getting in. He started flinging fireballs to map out the tunnel system, watching how they bounced off the walls like pinballs. Baek Yunho, watching this unfold, wasn't exactly feeling safe. Fireballs ricocheting in a closed-off space? Yeah, not the most comforting sight. Choi, completely unfazed, broke it down for him. This place was a labyrinth. If they went down the wrong path, they'd end up right back where they started, just like the fireballs. The key was to find a deep tunnel with no explosion marks. That would lead them to the queen. Baek Yunho had to admit, dude was on point. Having him on the team was reassuring. Without wasting any more time, the group advanced. While all this was going down, Jinwoo was casually running his 10 kilometers daily quest, flexing his insane stats like it was just another Tuesday. He glanced around. The streets were eerily empty. Even for a quiet area, it felt way too deserted. The Jeju Island broadcast must have started. He didn't need to watch, though. He already knew the Korean and Japanese S-rank hunters were legit. If everything went according to plan, they'd handle it. But when did things ever go according to plan? Back on Jeju, a giant ant got skewered like a kebab by several ice shards. Choi Jong-in observed the battlefield, noting that most of the ants had evacuated from the tunnels. Their prediction had been correct. Lim Taegyu, taking in the sight of the weirdly evolved ants, wasn't exactly impressed. If these were supposed to be the Queen's royal guards, then they were weak as hell. On closer inspection, their eyes had deteriorated, meaning these ants had evolved specifically to survive in darkness. That just made things easier. If these weren't actual royal guards, they could just bulldoze through with sheer firepower. Inside the tunnels, Min Byung-yu voiced a thought that had clearly been nagging at him. What if the Queen wasn't even here? What if she just dipped and left her people behind? Baek Yunho shot that idea down immediately. Nah, they were just ants. No complex betrayals here. Besides, this was an island. Where was she gonna go? The cameraman, struggling to keep up, muttered something about how dark it was and wondered if his camera was even picking up anything. Bro, you're in a literal monster den and worried about the footage? Priorities. But hey, he had faith in the editing team back at HQ to clean it up. Then, the tunnel opened up into a massive chamber. The spawning ground. Eggs stretched as far as the eye could see. And that could only mean one thing. The queen was nearby. The ants they had encountered earlier were probably stationed to protect this chamber. Choi Jong-in, wasting no time, decided to burn the entire place to the ground. Then, out of nowhere, Cha Hae-in's voice cut through. Wait, among all the hatched eggs, there was one that stood out. One that was absolutely massive. Min Byung-yu stared in disbelief. No way. That couldn't be an ant egg, right? Baek Yunho kept the team focused. The queen was the priority. Forget everything else. But even as he said that, he knew damn well that something was very, very wrong. Meanwhile, the Japanese team wasn't exactly having a good time. Akari Shimizu took one look at Tanaka Kenzo and damn, dude was wrecked. Kenzo, covered in way too many wounds, admitted that the flying ants were bigger pests than expected. They actually attacked in formation. Military tactics. Which shouldn't even be a thing, because, again, they were ants. He had managed to take out 30, but they got him in the shoulder and waist. Shimizu, smirking, offered to heal him. But of course, there was a catch. Kenzo groaned. Just heal me. She was way too entertained by this. I'm not asking for money this time, she teased. Kenzo did not have the patience for this. What do you want? That's when he noticed something. Shimizu wasn't saying anything, because she no longer had a head. Kenzo barely had time to react before a flash of movement, and the next thing he knew, his own head was gone too. The last man standing, Tatsumi Fujishima, didn't even get a chance to process what just happened, because he joined them immediately. 3 in a row. And just like that, their whole squad got folded like laundry. A set of glowing, menacing eyes peered out from the darkness, watching, waiting. Whatever had just taken them out was not here to play games. Ma Dongwook locked eyes on the towering ant in front of him, realization hitting like a brick to the face. So these guys are the Queen's Royal Guards. He did a quick assessment. Each one was basically an S-rank threat. Great. But at the end of the day, a bug was still a bug. Unlike hunters, who had a whole arsenal of tricks and strategies, these things were limited to their instincts. He just had to use that to his advantage. Without hesitation, he dodged a strike and called out to the waifu herself, Cha Heian. And oh boy, did she deliver. Cha Heian took off like a divine blade in motion. 1 second she was above the battlefield, the next, she was slicing through the royal guards like they were seasoned steak. The ants barely had time to register what was happening before they were splitting apart. But even with her ungodly speed, she noticed something annoying. These ants were way more resilient than she expected. Their exoskeletons were built different. Ma Dongwook, watching from the sidelines, couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. These weren't the usual brain-dead ants they had been mowing through before. They were tougher, faster, and way more of a pain in the ass. Min Byungyu, trying to act unfazed, chimed in like the support main he was. He reassured them that he had their backs, because clearly, this was the moment to pretend like he wasn't scared earlier. Baek Yunho wasn't letting that slide, so he finally decided to stop being a coward. Huh? But when he saw Byungyu casually crushing an ant's skull with his bare hands, he had to admit, that was kind of unexpected. Byungyu, not missing a beat, shot back, reminding Yunho that these ants didn't go down easily. Crush their heads all you want, but they could still fight unless you cut off their limbs or made sure they were actually dead. Then came the real head-scratcher. The queen was missing, but her royal guards were still here. That didn't make sense. Baek Yunho pieced it together. These must have been first-generation ants. The newer, stronger generation must be deeper in the tunnels, waiting. Min Byungyu, having regained his composure, threw out some buffs, instantly making the hunters feel supercharged. One dude literally said he felt so refreshed he could solo a squad of beasts. Which, bro, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Ma Dongwook, feeling the boost, threw out a challenge, 10 ants each. Min Byungyu was quick to tap out. He had A-rank combat skills, sure, but he wasn't about to pretend like he was built for this. Baek Yunho straight up refused to even consider relying on a healer. The buffs were great, but this was his fight, and he was about to show exactly why he was an S-rank. Meanwhile, on the Japanese side, things were not looking good. Their team was running through the forest, trying to figure out why Team Charlie had suddenly gone silent. The fact that they had to check up on them in the first place was already a bad sign. Then they found the battlefield, and it looked way too clean. Ants had been killed, sure, but where was the team? Ippei Izawa's heart sank when he spotted something on the ground. Fujishima's glasses. And that's when everything clicked. No, this wasn't happening. Kei, trembling, ripped off his mask and vomited right then and there. Ippei, confused, asked what was wrong. But Kei had already smelled it. Something rotten. Something so unnatural that even the air felt heavier. Then, a suffocating presence wrapped around them. Kei threw up an ice barrier in pure survival instinct, a massive one. Didn't matter. A monstrous claw tore through it like it was made of paper. Back to the Koreans. Turns out, they had been a little too confident. Baek Yunho reminded them that while they felt like they had been fighting for a long time, only 5 minutes had passed. Which meant they had actually been wrecking these ants at record speed. That was when his gaze landed on Cha Heian. She wasn't just doing well. she was outpacing them all. In just a few minutes, she had slaughtered twice as many ants as him. And considering who he was, that was crazy. Ma Dongwook quickly calculated their time. 15 minutes in. If they turned back now, it'd take even less time to get out. That gave them about 30 minutes left to clear the raid. Then, Cha Hayan sniffed the air. And just like that, her entire body tensed. She smelled something. Something awful. Something queen ant flavored. Baek Yunho focused his senses. And there she was, at the very back, with 8 guards blocking the way. Ma Dongwook wasted no time. He had a plan. The royal guards were basically S-rank beasts. But if the team worked together, they could handle them. Meanwhile, he would take on the queen himself. He turned to Cha Hayan. Could she handle the guards? She didn't even hesitate. Of course she could. Choi Jong-in, feeling zero chill, unleashed hell. Dude had been holding back this entire time. But today, absolutely not. With a smirk, he let his mana explode outward, shaping it into a massive fire dragon. Lim Taegyu, ever the sniper, provided long-range support. Baek Yunho, watching it all unfold, made a decision. No more restraint. No more holding back. Didn't matter if he looked like a monster. Didn't matter if he became something unrecognizable. If it meant wiping these damn ants off the face of the earth, he was all in. His body shifted, bones stretching, muscles contorting as he transformed. When it was over, what stood in his place was no longer human. Cha Hayan, taking one look at him, couldn't help but acknowledge it. Yeah, bro didn't look like a person anymore. He looked like a straight-up dungeon boss. Ma Dongwook locked eyes on Cha Hayan and called out, leaving the guards to her. She didn't need to be told twice. With a single movement, she unleashed Quake of Provocation, drawing the guards toward her like a magnet. The battlefield shifted. Their formation fell apart instantly. And that was all the opening Ma Dongwook needed. His role was simple now. Keep the queen busy until the waifu finished curb-stomping her bodyguards. From the sidelines, the cameraman felt his hands tremble slightly around his equipment. This was it. The real battle was about to begin. His crew was already hyped, screaming about record-breaking viewership. They had just hit 80%, and if they could get a little closer for a better shot. Before that thought could go any further, Min Byung-yu yanked him back. No hesitation. No sugarcoating. Welcome to the boss room of an S-rank dungeon. No one's gonna take responsibility for your life here. The cameraman swallowed hard. He was an A-rank, but standing next to Min Byung-yu, he felt like a complete amateur. Meanwhile, somewhere far from the action, an old man sat reading his newspaper, entirely uninterested in the biggest raid in Korea's history. His wife, on the other hand, wasn't having it. She kept trying to convince him to watch, arguing that these hunters were fighting to avenge their son. The old man just scoffed. He had heard all the talk before. He wasn't about to get his hopes up. But then, something changed. The broadcast exploded with excitement. The raid has begun. Korea's hunters are in the Queen's chamber. The old woman clutched her chest as the tension built. The largest ant in recorded history was standing before them. And Ma Dongwook was taking it on alone. But he needed backup, and fast. Then came the good news. Baek Yunho just took down one of the guards. The crowd watching the broadcast erupted. 4 left. 3. 2. They were almost there. The old man finally looked up from his newspaper. They've already tried this 3 times. This time, they need to win. His wife nodded in agreement. Then, the announcement everyone had been waiting for. All of the Queen's guards have been eliminated. Only the Queen Ant remains. The broadcast room was on fire. Viewership had shattered records, surpassing 85%. South Korea was one step away from making history. Back in the Queen's chamber, Ma Dongwook didn't waste a second. The Queen was alone now. Time to go in for the kill. Lim Taegyu let loose a storm of magic arrows, each one slamming into the Queen's head. Baek Yunho, in full beast form, tore through the battlefield. With a confident growl, he lunged at the Queen. A fatal mistake. Because if there was one thing that pissed off a queen, it was being treated like a joke. She retaliated. A wave of corrosive acid erupted from her mouth. Ma Dongwook and Baek Yunho didn't even have time to react. The acid splashed onto them, burning through armor, muscle, everything. Their screams echoed through the chamber. Min Byung-yu stepped in immediately, casting a mass healing spell. Their wounds closed in seconds. The queen hadn't even finished celebrating her attack when he smirked. You should have aimed for me. The queen turned her attention to him instantly. Ma Dongwook was already moving. Shield first. He slammed into her head like a freight train. You're not touching our healer. Choi Jong-in was done playing around. Stand back. The room exploded in fire. A massive inferno engulfed the queen, flames licking up her body, her screams filling the chamber. Baek Yunho, watching her writhe in agony, smirked. She's done for. He had seen enough battles to know when a beast was on its last legs. Then, something shifted. The queen let out a roar unlike anything they had ever heard. It wasn't a death cry. It was a summon. From the Japanese destroyer, alarms blared. Something was wrong. Goto Ryuji stood among a pile of dead ants, his sword dripping with blood, when the call came through. The ants were moving. All of them. Towards the tunnels. The jamming signals weren't working. What the hell? Back in the queen's chamber, the hunters barely had time to process what was happening before Cha Hayan stepped forward, blade drawn. It's over, right? Lim Taegyu, also catching his breath, nodded. Have we finally become the 7th country to clear an S-rank gate? Then Cha froze. Something fell off. Ma Dongwook's voice cut through the confusion. The ants are swarming toward us. We need to leave. Now. The hunters snapped their heads up. What? They still had time left. Did this mean the Japanese team failed to hold the line? Ma Dongwook shook his head. The association is still figuring it out, but we have to move. Then a horrifying sight. Choi Jong-in stared at the tunnel entrance, his face pale. The flame prison I cast over the entrance has been destroyed. Then the pressure hit. A presence so overwhelming, it felt like their very souls were being crushed. The air itself vibrated. Then it stepped into the chamber. A single ant. Baek Yunho, still in his beast form, froze in place. No, this wasn't possible. This didn't make sense. This one ant, the power radiating off of it felt like it could wipe them all out without breaking a sweat. Then it roared, and the entire island shook. Yo, if you made it this far, you need to hit that subscribe button, or this ant is pulling up to your house next. You got 5 seconds before it starts packing your bags. Cha Hayan barely had time to process what was happening before her knees gave out beneath her. 1 second she was fine, the next, her stomach twisted in a way that had her clutching her mouth, fighting the urge to hurl. The smell was vile, thick, suffocating, pure death. And at the source of it all stood the monster. The armored ant loomed over them, towering, unbothered, radiating an ungodly amount of mana. Cha Hayan, struggling to keep herself upright, felt the weight of its presence press down on her. No, this wasn't some regular oversized bug. This was a different breed. Lim Taegyu, who had always been way too cocky for his own good, now looked like his soul was actively trying to escape his body. His hands shook as he gritted his teeth, desperately trying to rally himself. They didn't have time to stand around. This thing needed to die now. But then, it ignored them. Ma Dongwook watched in stunned silence as the ant walked right past them. It wasn't even acknowledging them, like they weren't even worth its time. Their hearts pounded in unison as it approached the queen. It stopped in front of her, towering over her like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. Then its mandibles twitched, and it roared. Louder, deeper. If the first roar was enough to shake the island, this one was personal. It was pissed. Cha Hayan staggered backward, but before she could even process what was happening, it disappeared. 1 second it was near the queen. The next, it was right behind her. She barely had time to react before its fist slammed into her ribs. Crack. She was airborne. Then she wasn't. Her body collided with the cave wall, spitting enough blood to paint a masterpiece. Ma Dongwook roared her name, panic surging through his veins. But bro couldn't even finish her name before the ant appeared in front of him. His shield was up instantly. Didn't matter. The ant's hand shattered it like it was made of cake. Ma Dongwook barely had time to register the violation before it ripped the axe from his other hand. And just like that, bro could no longer high-five anyone. Next up, Yunho. Enraged, he transformed, muscles bulging, claws extending, a beast ready to kill. Didn't matter. The ant ripped through his throat before he even got the chance to let out a full roar. Fireboy's turn. Choi Jong-in barely raised his hands before the ant teleported in front of him and caved in his stomach. Bro wasn't throwing fireballs. He was collecting internal bleeding. Then came Lim Taegyu, the last of the group who still had an ounce of confidence. He drew his bow, aiming with precision. A perfect shot. No way he'd miss. He fired, and the ant caught it midair. Before Lim Taegyu even had time to comprehend the absolute mockery of physics he just witnessed, the ant casually bitch-slapped him into the dirt. At least he tried. Then, something unexpected. A body slam sent the ant skidding backward. It was Ma Dongwook, fully healed, and able to shake hands again. "My arms may have been cut off," he declared, a new fire in his eyes. "But I've got Byungyu." Min Byungyu remained perfectly still. His disguise skill was active, rendering him invisible to all senses. No sound, no presence, he didn't exist. "It can't find me." The beast could sniff out his teammates all it wanted. As long as his heels kept coming, they'd outlast this walking extinction event. It was a solid plan. Until it wasn't. Ma Dongwook lunged at the ant again, determined to stall it. Didn't matter. The ant caught him midair like he was nothing, then slammed him into the ground so hard the floor cracked. Min Byungyu watched in horror as Ma Dongwook's body twitched once, then stopped moving. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part was that the ant was staring straight at him. His blood ran ice cold. That's not possible. He hadn't moved. He hadn't made a sound. It shouldn't know he's here. His skill was still in effect. Then why? Why was it looking right at him? The air crackled with silent terror. Then, a flash of movement. Something cold. Something sharp. Min Byungyu didn't even feel it at first. But he saw it. A hand. Through his chest. Baek Yunho could only watch. Helpless. Frozen. His voice cracked. "Byungju." And just like that, the healer was gone. Min Byunggu's voice barely rose above a whisper, but the weight of his words crashed down like a boulder. "Run." Baek Yunho's breath hitched. His instincts screamed at him to bolt, but his body refused to move. The horror unfolded in front of him in slow motion. The monstrous ant roared, its hulking form towering over them. Then, without hesitation, it went in for a taste. The healer didn't even get a chance to scream before his head was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. The other hunters stood frozen, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and sheer terror. Baek Yunho's mind snapped. He launched himself at the beast, his dead friend's body hitting the ground like a discarded ragdoll. But before he could even attempt anything meaningful, the ant's clawed hand clamped around his neck, hoisting him into the air like a disobedient kitten. Mockingly, the creature repeated Byunggu's final words, its grotesque mandibles twisting them into something sinister. "Run, Yunho. Run away. Yunho." The taunt sent rage coursing through him, his teeth grinding together as he managed to spit out a defiant insult through the suffocating grip. The ant squeezed tighter, relishing in his struggle, then did something no monster should have been able to do. It spoke. The words came out in a garbled, unnatural cadence, but they were clear enough. Weak. They were all weak. The queen was dead, but killing them all wasn't enough. It wanted more. And then it happened. The monster's body tensed, its head tilting slightly. Like a corrupted file suddenly loading, memories not its own flickered behind those monstrous eyes. It had not just devoured Byunggu's body, it had stolen his power, his knowledge. And with that came understanding. It spoke again, but this time the words were laced with something far more chilling, curiosity. "Who is your king?" Baek Yunho barely had time to process the question before the ant suddenly jerked its head toward the tunnel entrance, its entire demeanor shifting. Something outside. Something strong. And then, just like that, he was dropped. He collapsed onto the cold, blood-stained ground, gasping, coughing up the coppery taste of his own pain. His mind spun as he forced out the words between ragged breaths. Outside. Was it heading toward Goto Ryuji? But there was no time to think. The ant swarm surged forward like a living tide, and Yunho barely had a moment to curse before they were on him. Meanwhile, the Japanese hunters were starting to get an itch in their collective spines. Something was wrong. First, Team Charlie went silent. Then Team Delta. Goto, ever the cool-headed leader, offered a simple explanation. Maybe there was a signal disruption. But even he knew that was reaching. Kane's voice crackled through the radio, confirming that only Team Alpha was still in contact. Should they check it out? Negative. Goto assured them he had it covered. They were to finish their task and hold position. Then his phone rang. A number he recognized. Matsumoto. Before their conversation could go anywhere, the perspective shifted. This time to a Chinese naval vessel stationed not far from the action. The captain, watching the chaos unfold from afar, commented on Korea's bold move. But his officer wasn't too worried. The ants wouldn't be crazy enough to fly all the way to China. Right? The captain smirked. The Japanese were too invested, too eager. Goto Ryuji's desperation to become a national-level hunter was all too obvious. And yet, despite his record, he had yet to clear an S-rank gate. The captain's eyes gleamed with amusement. He smelled an opportunity. Meanwhile, Goto stood amidst carnage. His radio buzzed with increasing urgency, but he didn't respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on what was left of his men. When he finally spoke, his tone was cold. Hunters had died. Unnecessary losses, Matsumoto noted. But no need to be sentimental. They were weak. The strong survived. Matsumoto's amusement was almost tangible through the line. Ever the ruthless one, Goto. No matter. The plan was still intact. With the jamming signals down, all the ants were now heading straight for the Queen's location. Another unexpected twist, but nothing out of control. Then came the real question. Would the South Koreans survive? Goto didn't hesitate. 0% chance. Not even a sliver of hope. Matsumoto chuckled darkly, already spinning the headlines in his mind. The Japanese hunters valiantly assisted the Koreans, only to be forced to withdraw when the entire Korean raid team was wiped out. Tragic, truly. And in the midst of it all, Goto's bid for national-level status would conveniently be denied. The press would feast on it. And just like that, the final order came. Pull out. Only, before Goto could give the command, something blurred into view. A flash of motion, an attack. He barely managed to block with his sword. Ishida wasn't so lucky. Her body crumpled, lifeless, before Goto's eyes. He immediately knew. This was no ordinary ant. Minoru was ordered to fall back. Protests were shut down instantly. Against something like this, he'd only be a liability. Then the ant spoke, Ishida's severed head still clutched in its claws. Are you the king? For a moment, Goto was stunned. A monster that could talk. A smile flickered on his lips, though his mind was racing. Why, yes. Yes, I am. The air tensed. A pulse of raw magical energy exploded from the ant, sending a cold chill straight down his spine. Goto's confidence wavered as a sensation long buried clawed its way back into his memory. This feeling, he had felt it before. When was it? His thoughts were cut short. Literally. Meanwhile, inside the Queen's chamber, the Korean hunters were barely holding on. Yunho shouted for more firepower, but Choi Jong-in knew the risks. If he burned any hotter, there wouldn't be any oxygen left to breathe. Their situation was beyond dire. Injuries stacked upon injuries, their healer long gone. If this kept up, there wouldn't be a way out. Then, something cut through the chaos. A blur of movement. Yunho's breath hitched. What was that? A black soldier? The scene cut away to a city street. It's Jinwoo, his eyes glowing with an unmistakable, overwhelming power. And then, the moment everyone had been waiting for, the single word that would change everything. Exchange. The cameraman clutched his teeth, face frightened, hands shaking as he stared at the absolute massacre unfolding before him. His mind was running on pure denial. What the hell just happened? The last thing he said to his father looped in his head like a cursed tick-tock sound. That was it. That's how their last conversation went down. He could have said anything else, but no, he had to drop some casual small talk. Have you eaten yet? Now there was no rewind button. Then came the real problem. A giant ant loomed over him, mandibles clicking like it was about to one-shot him for the clip. It lunged, then stopped. A blade had been shoved straight through its chest. The body dropped. Igris didn't even blink. The guy just pulled his sword back like he was clocking out of work and moved on. Meanwhile, KMS Broadcasting was in full meltdown mode. Everyone straight up considering a career change. What do you mean our S-rank hunters got packed up by one ant? The phones were exploding. Sir, the lines are about to fry. Viewers are losing their minds. The director slammed his hands on the table. So what? What do they expect us to do? Air their funeral in 4K. It's over. We're done. Then, one of the staff ran in like they just saw a ghost. Sir, someone just showed up at the scene. The director, too mentally drained to care, waved them off. Huh, who the hell is it? Take a look. He did. And suddenly, everything changed. Go live. Now. A producer panicked. Sir, if we go live now, there won't be a delay. What if this goes sideways? We already pulled the plug once. It can't get worse. Go. Live. Now. Our fate is now, in the hands of that man. Jinwoo strolled in like he owned the place, shadow soldiers rolling behind him like an entourage. He had used Shadow Exchange to swap places with one of his marked shadows. And now, he was here, with his entire army. The vibe shifted instantly. He calls out Iron. Iron, ever the hype man, let out a roar that shook the whole chamber. The ants whipped their heads toward him, looking ready to throw hands. Jinwoo just gave him a nod. Good work. Then, he pulled out his daggers. The Demon King's daggers. And then came the slaughter. Jinwoo moved, and suddenly, limbs were flying. His daggers cut through ant armor like it was wet cardboard. The injured hunters? Absolutely flabbergasted. Who is that? Baek Yunho, barely conscious but still able to process insanity, exhaled. Coach Ma, we're saved. But Jinwoo wasn't alone. Igris was next to him, flaming sword making ants extra crispy, plowing through them like a wrecking ball. The bears and Iron also joined in. It wasn't a battle, it was a purge. And Jinwoo wasn't even trying yet. I guess it's time to ramp things up. Arise. The battlefield twitched. Every fallen ant corpse suddenly began to move. At the KMS newsroom, sheer chaos. What the hell? Did he just turn the ants into zombies? They urged the commentator, explain. The whole country is watching. The commentator? Absolutely cooked. Well, I have no idea what's happening. The ants turned on each other. Full-on confusion. Meanwhile, Jinwoo? Unbothered. He walked up to the injured hunters, calm as ever. Everyone gather around. He pulled out health potions. Drink these. I'll explain later. They chugged it, eyes widening as wounds sealed in seconds. Ma Dongwook turned toward Cha Hayan. Why is she still unconscious? Jinwoo's jaw tightened. Her injuries are too serious. I can't heal her. His fist clenched. She was getting weaker. The last of the ants dropped dead, and Jinwoo turned back to the hunters. Time to leave. We're done here. Ma Dongwook nodded. Right. Let's go. Then, the air changed. A heavy pressure filled the chamber. It was back. The monstrous ant returned, its aura so thick it felt like the air was crushing down on them. Your king was not outside. Baek Yunho's stomach dropped. If this thing was here, then, does that mean Goto Ryuji lost? Jinwoo's eyes darkened. I was wondering why Goto Ryuji's shadow disappeared. His voice turned ice cold. Because of this guy. The ant locked onto him. Are you the king of the humans? Jinwoo tilted his head, completely unfazed. A talking bug. Huh. Peak Cinema was about to begin. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time.